The security guard stayed remarkably calm, right up until the moment the guest produced a pair of handcuffs and attempted to chain himself to the reception desk. And this, believe it or not, was only the fourth most difficult removal the hotel had handled that year. Here is something most people never stop to consider. Getting yourself banned from a hotel, banned for life, permanently, your name flagged across an entire chain, is astonishingly hard to do. Hotels are built on forgiveness. The staff have seen everything, absorbed everything, smiled warmly through everything. They will forgive noise, and mess, and rudeness, and a truly heroic quantity of nonsense, all in the sacred name of the booking, which means that to actually get thrown out for good, a person has to do something special. They have to find the one invisible line a hotel simply will not tolerate being crossed, and then cross it gloriously, on purpose. Hotels forgive almost everything. Almost. Tonight we meet the guests who found the almost. 9 people who committed themselves so completely to one strange idea that a hotel had no remaining choice but to escort them permanently out the front door. We climb from the mildly ridiculous toward the frankly legendary. And the very last one is still, years later, told at staff parties in a hushed and reverent voice. 1. It began, as these things so often do, with a single pigeon. The bird had taken to landing on the balcony railing of a room occupied by Reginald, a retired man in his 70s, of formidable dignity and absolutely no sense of proportion, and Reginald decided, on the very first morning, that this would not stand. A lesser man might have closed the curtain. Reginald declared war. He opened with diplomacy, shooing the bird with a rolled newspaper, which the pigeon interpreted correctly as a challenge. When diplomacy failed, Reginald escalated to engineering. He constructed deterrents out of room service trays and dental floss. He rearranged the balcony furniture into what he privately referred to as a defensive perimeter. He spent the better part of an afternoon crouched behind a chair, entirely motionless, waiting to ambush a creature that was, by every available account, simply enjoying the view. By the third day, the campaign had a strategy, a schedule, and, alarmingly, a logbook. Reginald recorded the pigeon's movements in a notebook, referring to it throughout as the enemy. He filed a formal written complaint with the front desk demanding the hotel address the infestation being one bird. And then he crossed the line. In a final, decisive assault involving a great deal of water and a partially disassembled curtain rod, Reginald damaged the balcony railing, cracked a pane of glass, and flooded the room directly below, all in pursuit of a pigeon that flapped off, unharmed and mildly amused, at the very first splash. That was the line. You may terrorize a bird. You may not, it turns out, dismantle a building to do it. Reginald was invited to leave and never return, a decision he received as a personal betrayal by an institution that had failed to grasp the gravity of the threat. He is said to have paused on the front steps, looked up at the balcony one last time, and informed the pigeon that this was not over. 2. Margaret, in her 50s, was a woman of exacting standards and a deeply held conviction that the perfect room existed somewhere in the building, and that the hotel was simply hiding it from her. She arrived on a Monday and requested a change of room on Monday night. Her first reason was reasonable, a draft. Her second, on Tuesday, was less so. The room was facing the wrong way, though she could not say which way was right. By Wednesday, the reasons had detached from reality altogether. One room felt watched. Another had an unlucky number. A third was rejected because the hallway outside it smelled of decisions. The staff, endlessly patient, moved her again and again, hauling her considerable luggage from floor to floor like a traveling exhibition. Margaret kept a running assessment of each room's failings, delivered to the front desk every morning as a kind of formal report. The trouble was arithmetic. A hotel contains a finite number of rooms, and Margaret was working through them at a pace that genuinely alarmed the reservation system. By the end of the week, she had personally occupied and rejected more than a dozen, several of which she then demanded to be moved back into, having concluded in hindsight that they were superior after all. The final straw was not the switching itself. It was the morning she demanded a room the hotel did not have, a specific corner suite on a floor that did not exist, and, on being told so, accused the staff of concealing inventory and threatened to report them to an authority she pointedly declined to name. She was, gently and finally, checked out of every room at once. She left insisting the perfect room was in there somewhere. She was probably right. She would simply never again be allowed to look for it. 3. Some guests come to a hotel to sleep. Nathaniel, in his 30s, came to hunt ghosts. He had read on a website of deeply questionable authority that this particular hotel was a documented hotspot of paranormal activity. It was not. It was a business hotel near an airport, and he arrived equipped. Cameras, a device that beeped, a voice recorder for capturing messages from beyond, and, more problematically, an iron determination to conduct his investigations at the hours the spirits were apparently most active, which was to say between 2 and 4 in the morning. Now, be honest with me. If you were lying awake at 3 in the morning and heard, through the wall, a grown man loudly and sincerely asking an empty hallway to give us a sign, would you truly have been able to resist getting up to look? The other guests could not. Nathaniel's investigations were not quiet. They involved calling out to the dead, knocking on walls to establish communication, and, on one unforgettable night, a full evacuation volume shriek at the exact moment the device that beeped. He roamed the corridors in the dark. He set up equipment in the stairwell. When asked repeatedly to stop, he explained with the wounded patience of a misunderstood scientist that he was so close to a breakthrough and that the hotel was actively interfering with important work. The line he crossed was not, in the end, the noise. It was the night he picked the lock on a supply closet he was certain contained a presence, setting off an alarm, and then refused to come out of the closet because the readings were finally spiking. The only presence the hotel could confirm was his, and it removed that presence permanently. Nathaniel departed, convinced the ban itself was proof the hotel had something to hide. In a sense, it did. It was him. So far, these guests had fought birds, and furniture, and the afterlife. The next few had a grander ambition altogether. They did not merely want to occupy a room, they wanted to occupy the entire building. Hotels forgive almost everything. Almost. But a guest who tries to own the place is testing exactly how far almost can stretch. 4. Vanessa, a management consultant in her 40s, did not see a hotel lobby. She saw an underutilized workspace, and she moved in. It started modestly enough, with a laptop and a large coffee at a corner table. Within a day, it had become an installation. She rearranged 2 armchairs and a side table into a configuration she found more collaborative. She annexed a power outlet with a great tangle of chargers. She conducted video calls at a volume calibrated for a much larger and considerably more interested audience, narrating quarterly strategy to the entire lobby, whether it cared to attend or not. She began referring to her table, and then inevitably to her corner, and asked the front desk with total sincerity whether she might block book the space for the length of her stay. When another guest dared to sit in one of her armchairs, she informed them, kindly but firmly, that the area was reserved. It was not reserved. It was a lobby. The staff tolerated an astonishing amount of this, because a lobby is a public space, and a paying guest is a paying guest. What they could not tolerate arrived the morning Vanessa attempted to have a delivery of office supplies sent to the lobby, addressed to herself, and began setting up a small printer. A guest may not install infrastructure. When finally asked to pack up her operation, she demanded to see the lease, as though she were holding one. She was not holding one. She was removed, printer and all, still explaining that the arrangement had been working really well. For her, undoubtedly. For the dozen strangers made to hear about Synergy for a week, considerably less so. 5. There is a certain kind of guest who is never satisfied, and then, in a category entirely his own, there was Gerald, a man in his 50s who treated dissatisfaction not as a mood but as a full-time occupation. Gerald did not complain about one thing. Gerald complained about everything, in writing, constantly, submitting formal grievances to the front desk, at a rate that eventually required its own folder, and then its own drawer. The complaints were meticulous and gloriously deranged. The elevator arrived at an unfriendly speed. The lobby lighting was a hostile shade of white. A painting in the corridor featured a portrait whose subject, Gerald wrote in careful longhand, looks at me with obvious disapproval, and he requested it be removed, or at the very least, turned to face the wall. He timed the breakfast. He rated the staff. He once filed a complaint about the tone of the response to his previous complaint. Each was submitted with the grave solemnity of a man documenting a genuine injustice, numbered, dated, and signed. The staff answered them, at first, one by one, out of sheer professional duty, until the pure volume began to paralyze the desk, which could no longer serve arriving guests in the time it took to process Gerald's daily dossier. That was the line, and it was a strange one, because Gerald was not banned for being rude, or destructive, or loud. He was banned for administrative reasons, for single-handedly rendering the front desk non-functional through the industrial-scale production of grievance. He filed one final complaint about the ban itself, naturally. It was, fittingly, the only complaint left with no one still assigned to read it. 6. Eleanor, in her 60s, had a soft heart and a window that opened, which turned out to be a genuinely dangerous combination. On her first morning, she fed a single seagull a single crust of toast from her breakfast tray, an act of ordinary kindness that would, within days, summon an entire ecosystem. The gull returned the next morning with friends. Eleanor, delighted, upgraded her offerings. She began saving food from every meal, then ordering extra specifically for her guests, laying it all out along the windowsill like a small hotel of her own running beneath the real one. Word spread, as it always does, through the animal kingdom. The gulls became a colony. The colony drew in the braver pigeons, who drew in, at ground level, a family of extremely confident raccoons. And by the end of the week, the exterior of the hotel beneath Eleanor's window had become a bona fide wildlife destination, complete with noise, mess, and the occasional territorial dispute conducted loudly at dawn. She named them. She spoke to them. She defended them fiercely to a horrified housekeeper. The line arrived on the morning the raccoons, now thoroughly accustomed to the buffet, stopped waiting outside altogether and simply let themselves in, through a propped service door, into a corridor, and eventually into the breakfast room itself, where a family of them held a busy Sunday hostage. Eleanor was not malicious. She was the precise opposite of malicious, which somehow made the whole thing worse. She was banned with genuine regret on both sides and left worrying aloud about who on earth would feed them now. The raccoons, for the record, managed perfectly well on their own. 7. You have met this man. Somewhere, at some point, beside some pool, you have met this exact man. And if you have not, I am sorry to be the one to tell you that you may in fact be him. His name was Dashiell. He was in his 30s. He described himself without irony as a wellness and vibe curator, and he arrived at the hotel pool bearing a portable speaker roughly the size of a small refrigerator and a sense of mission. The pool, in Dashiell's expert assessment, lacked energy. It was too quiet. The other guests, dozing peacefully over their paperbacks, did not yet realize they were desperately craving an atmosphere, and Dashiell had come to provide one, free of charge, and against all possible objection. He set up his equipment at the deep end and began, in his words, to curate. There was a playlist. There were, heaven help everyone present, transitions. He narrated the mood over the music in the low, breathy tone of a man introducing a guided meditation, gently encouraging total strangers to drop in and feel the frequency. When one guest asked him politely to turn it down, he explained that the volume was intentional and part of a shared journey. When the family beside him asked again, rather less politely, he informed them that they were blocking the flow. The line, when it finally came, was volume and defiance in equal measure. Told directly by a manager to switch the speaker off, Daschle instead turned it up and delivered a short, impassioned address about how the modern world was starving for real connection. He was disconnected, from the power supply first, and then from the hotel. He left describing the ban as a boundaries issue, which, for the first and only time, was entirely accurate. The boundary was the edge of the property, and he was now standing on the far side of it. 8. By the time we reach Bruce, we have arrived squarely at open defiance. Bruce, in his 40s, carried himself with the bearing of a man who had either served in an elite military unit or watched a truly enormous number of documentaries about one, and he had a fitness regimen that could not, he firmly believed, be interrupted by anything so trivial as the sleep of others. Every morning, well before dawn, Bruce ran, not outside, where running belongs, but through the hotel corridors, in loud, thundering, sprinting intervals, up and down the carpeted halls past the doors of sleeping guests, pausing occasionally to perform a set of explosive, grunting exercises against a fire door. He treated the hallways as his personal running track and the stairwell as his personal gymnasium, and he treated the very first noise complaint as a direct challenge to his discipline. When the front desk asked him to stop, Bruce did not argue like the others. He simply refused, reframing the request as weakness and informing the young clerk that the grind doesn't take a day off. He escalated in response to every warning, adding volume, then hours, then, at some point, a whistle. The staff endured a remarkable amount of this, largely because a man cannot technically be arrested for jogging. What ended it was the morning Bruce, mid-sprint, collided directly with a housekeeping cart, sent a small avalanche of towels and miniature shampoos cascading down the corridor, woke an entire floor, and then blamed the cart. He was removed while explaining that the collision could easily have been avoided if everyone else simply trained harder. The grind, at long last, took a day off. Several of them, in fact. Permanently. 9. And so we arrive at the guest no one at this hotel has ever managed to forget. The one whose story is handed down among the staff, the way old sailors hand down legends. Her name has been lost, or perhaps quietly protected, but her act is immortal. She was a woman of a certain age and a truly magnificent sense of occasion. In town for a black-tie gala the hotel was hosting in its grand marble lobby. The kind of evening with a string quartet, an ocean of champagne, and, at the very center of it all, an ornate lobby fountain that had gurgled decoratively for decades and asked absolutely nothing of anyone. She regarded that fountain over the course of the evening with a slowly growing conviction that it was being wasted. All that water, all that beautiful marble, simply sitting there, doing nothing, while the party swirled around it. And somewhere near midnight, resplendent in a floor-length evening gown, a glass of champagne still in one hand, she made her decision. She did not fall in. She did not stumble. She stepped with tremendous dignity over the marble lip and down into the fountain. And there, before the quartet and the caterers and 100 astonished guests in their finery, she performed what witnesses could only later describe as a slow, ceremonial, entirely self-appointed baptism, declaring the fountain, at last, in use. She was serene. She was radiant. She toasted the entire room from the center of the water. The hotel naturally banned her for life, because one cannot bathe in the lobby, however tragically underused the fountain. But here is the thing the ban could never touch. Everyone else in that lobby had spent the whole evening being elegant and careful and correct, and exactly one person had done something they would still be describing to strangers in 20 years. She was escorted out dripping, unhurried, and beaming. pausing at the door to raise her glass one final time to a room that would never, as long as it stood, forget her. She had traded a hotel she could return to for a story that will comfortably outlive her. Some would argue she got by far the better end of the deal. So let me ask you first, before anything else, and be honest, down in the comments, what is the one thing you have done in a hotel that came the closest to getting you thrown out? The moment a member of staff gave you a certain look, the look that said you were standing much nearer to the line than you had realized? Tell me, this is a safe place for the almost band. Because here is what all 9 of these people understood, whether they ever meant to or not. Hotels forgive almost everything. Almost. The staff will quietly absorb your noise, and your mess, and your endless small demands, and remember not a single word of it a week later. The only way to become truly unforgettable is to find that one invisible line, and then to cross it so completely, so sincerely, that they are left with no choice but to make you a legend on your way out the door. Most of these guests lost a hotel. Every last one of them gained something stranger and far more permanent. A story still being told night after night. Inside a building they are no longer allowed to enter. So if you would like to keep meeting the people brave enough or foolish enough to go looking for the line the rest of us so politely stay behind, then stay with us. And should you ever find yourself at a black tie gala beside a beautiful, criminally underused fountain, do resist. Probably. The ban, after all, lasts a lifetime. But then again, so apparently does the legend.